Hey, it's Trip here from the 87th. This video is about the overhead break in BMS 4.33. Information is current as of update 2. We are going to make an overhead break to the Changzhou airport, and I am simulating leading a 4-ship for this overhead break on runway 34 left. Presently we're at 3,700 feet and 21 miles from the airport, and if we look down at the HSI, what I've done is I've put the course indicator on 340. I did that before takeoff so that if I forgot what runway I took off from, why it's set for me here. But another reason to have it set on 340 is it gives me a great representation on the HSI about where I am in relation to the center line of runway 34 left, which is what I want to fly down for the initial. Now, this is by no means an instrument approach that we're doing here. It's strictly visual when you do an overhead break, but this just gives me a reference that I can quickly use to determine how close I'm getting to that extended final approach course. So the closer this CDI gets to being centered, the closer I want my heading to be on 340. Now, another thing I've done, and I do it for all takeoffs because it's really easy to do, and it helps just for this very situation if I'm going to be leading a flight back for an overhead break. I make a mark point at the end of the runway. So when I'm sitting in position on the end of the runway for takeoff, I can make a mark point, and it's so simple to do. So if I was imagine I was sitting on the runway now and I want to make this mark point, all I have to do is press the mark button. Now, I've got this programmed into my HOTUS, so I'm just going to do it that way, but each time I press this marks button, a new display comes up in the DED. I don't want to make this mark point via the HUD. I don't want to make it via the TGP. Press it again. Oh, I could do an overfly. So I'm sitting on the end of the runway now, and I've got overfly as the method of making the mark point. All I've got to do now is TMS up, and that will place an X. I don't know if you can see it there, but it just popped up at my aircraft position. So this would be right at the end of the runway. And if I want to make this the active steer point, now of course if I was going on a mission here, I wouldn't want steer point 26 showing up, as I'm fixing to take off. So I could just simply go back to return and hit steer point 2 and then enter. And now it'd be I'd have something useful here. And that's just what I do. And again, I've got commands into my stick. I don't have to take my hands off the throttle to do the ICP work. Just do it through the stick. So now I've got a reference point that's right at the end of the runway that I'm going to be approaching. And normally when you take off on one runway and go back to the same airbase, you're probably going to be landing on the same runway. You might be on the right runway, but it's not enough to make a difference. I can still use the mark point that I made for 3-4 left if I happen to be landing on 3-4 right. Alrighty, so that is really going to help me out, especially since to fly an overhead break, I need to be 1,500 feet above the field elevation. The field elevation at Changzhou is 650 feet, or is it Changwon? One of the two that we're using here is 650 feet MSL. So add 1,500 to that. I want to be at 2,150 feet when I'm over the pitch out point, right over the top of the runway. Now if you look out to the left, actually the runway is, no, let's see, let's put it back on steer point 1 here. Actually, I'm going to use the steer point that I made. So I'm going to go to this page, and there we go. So now the runway is over here to the left about 45 degrees, and I'm at 3,700 feet. If I look over here to the left, I can't see anything that has anything to do with the runway. I can't even see the field. Okay, so that's why having this displayed on the HSI is so important or so helpful. I can see that pretty soon here I'm going to have to start to make my left-hand turn so that I don't go shooting through the final approach course. I can just look at this displacement and see how soon it is that I'm going to be turning, and even though I can't see the airfield. So let's go ahead and let the airplane run. Let me see what I got a master caution light about here. Let's see what they've done to me. Stores configuration. All right, we can fix that. All righty, very good. All right, let's let the airplane run and we'll talk some more here. So I can't work down to 2,150 feet, but I can get my airspeed under control. I'm going to get my track IR going. All righty. Take a look down at the HSI. I can start my turn in here. Not going to be hurting anything. Trying to work down to, I still can't see the runway out there, to 2,100 feet when I can. So I'm right on the center line right now, and I got a little bit more turn to go. I don't want to really yank and bank here because I got wingmen on my right wing. So you got to be gentle, be considerate of them. All right, I'm going to roll out here. I probably overshot, so I'm going to hold a heading just a little bit to the left here as I work my altitude down. Now we're pretty close. All right, so we're going to be landing on runway 34 left, and I want to make sure that I look out on my right wing and see my wingman lined up on the right side, because I'm going to be making a left-hand pitch out. You never want to turn into another airplane on your wingtip. That would be disastrous. Now, if I was doing this for sure, I'd have the tower in, which I do, and I'd be making a 10-mile initial call. And it alerts other aircraft that are fixing to take off as to what we're doing here, or that are already established in the landing pattern. We don't have priority over those airplanes landing, so if a conflict arose here, we would have to resolve it ourselves. All right, I can work myself down here another 1,000 feet. By 5 miles, you should have everything squared away. You should be at 1,500 feet above the ground, doing 350 knots, lined up on final. Everything should be looking pretty rosy. All right, I'm going to get down to 2,150 feet here and put it on freeze and talk about some more things. Right now we're at 9 miles, so I should be squared away, have my Sierra together by 5 miles. Hopefully. Let it run a little bit more. Alright, I'm going to put it on freeze here and talk about some more stuff. Alright, so we're coming down initial, 1,500 feet above the ground. 350 knots is typical, whatever your squadron wants to do. Some do 400, some do 300. But 350 is a good speed for this type of approach. Again, it's a visual approach. Now, you can see the right-hand runway up there. I don't want to make a right-hand pitch because generally you don't want to interfere with traffic that might be in the pattern using the right runway. They might be making a right downwind over there, and you just don't know. So the tower has cleared us for a left pitch out. Now, if you want to get clearance to do a right-hand pitch, you can do that by asking tower. Of course, it doesn't do anything good in Falcon, but as long as you get clearance from ATC, you can probably pretty much do what you want to do. But I find that it's a lot easier to fly pitch outs making left-hand turns. You ever thought about why that is? Why is it easier to fly as a wingman off the lead's right wing as opposed to his left wing? Why is it easier to make left-hand turns in the holding pattern as opposed to right-hand turns? And I think the reason is that when you have your hand on the stick, the right hand's on the stick, the palm of your hand is pressing on the stick as you make a left-hand turn, as opposed to having to pull the stick to the right for right-hand turns. It just is a better feeling in the palm of your hand, and that's why pilots prefer, in those situations to be on the right wing of lead, or making left turns and holding. It's just a feel thing. Alrighty, so we're looking up at the runway. This is a great chance for lead to announce to the flight what lane he wants to use for the hot lane. Now, if I look up ahead here, I can see a parking area off to the right. Well, if I land on the left runway, I'm going to have to cross the right runway to get to it. That's a lot of trouble. It looks like I could just go to the end of this runway, and there's another parking area right here. So I'm going to specify to the flight that we're going to use the right lane of runway 34 left, in other words the right half of that runway. That's going to be the hot lane. And so if the airplane behind me has a brake failure, you know, I don't want him, and I'm trying to slow down as I get approach the end of the runway, and his brakes have failed. I don't want him running up my tailpipe, so I want to give him some room. So he's going to be maneuvering on the left, or correction, the right half of the runway. That's the hot lane. So as a wingman, if lead specifies the right lane as the hot line, that kind of tells me that we're going to be getting to the end of the runway at the turnoff point and making a left turn off the runway. We're going to stay in the cold lane. As a matter of fact, that's what we're going to do. Once we touch down, and each airplane touches down on the center line. There's none of this leads touching down on the left, right you take the, or 2 you take the right, 3 you take the left. That's just silliness. Every airplane touches down on the center line of the airplane in trail, theoretically 5 seconds in trail, because if each aircraft pitches out 5 seconds after the one in, to his left in this case, then everything that you do in the pattern is going to be 5 seconds behind the guy in front of you. So if the guy in front touches down, you're going to be touching down 5 seconds behind him. It never works out that way because of a lot of variances, but that's the idea. So the safest thing for each airplane to do is to touch down on the center line. If you planned on touching down on the left side of the runway, and just as you touch down your left tire blew, that would have a tendency to pull you further left, and you might run off the end of the edge of the runway. So the safest place for you to be when you touch down is on the center line of the runway, and that's what you're going to do. Now, once you start slowing down, then you can transition over to this cold lane, and get out of this area of hot lane in case the guy behind you, has a situation where he needs to use all of that available runway. You're going to be out of his way on the cold side. So the right side is going to be the hot lane. Alrighty, let's see. Let's let the airplane run here and see if we can complete this overhead brake. So I'm doing 350 knots. I'm going to start my pitch out just over the numbers, or just about where that diamond is, maybe a little bit past it. If I only had a 2-ship, I might wait till I'm halfway down the runway, but if I have 4 ships, 3 on my wing, I don't want to go to the far end of the runway before I start my pitch, because by the time number 4 pitched out, he'd be out over that lake someplace, and that wouldn't be good. So I'm going to hold my altitude here, 60 degrees of bank, pull the throttle back, pull about 2 to 3 degrees, or correction, G's of in the turn, so that I can keep my displacement on downwind, fairly close to the runway. All right, so there's about where it is. I call leads in the pitch, 60 degrees of bank, 2 or 3 degrees of turn, pull the throttle back a little bit, just kind of try to hold altitude. Looking pretty good here. Now I can look down at my HSI. Yes, sir. I can look down at my HSI. I can see that how many more degrees of turn I have to go before I roll out on downwind. I don't have to think of any numbers. I just look at when I'm parallel, which is right there. I start my rollout, and if I look back over my shoulder, I can see the missile rail is pretty close to the edge of the runway, and that's about where I want to be. Now the other thing is I'm below my 300 knots, the gear's coming down. Well, I can look back over my shoulder and see that I'm 45 degrees off the end of the runway, which is right about there. I start my left turn, and I hold about 3 or 4 degrees of pitch down, and about 1.3 to 1.4 G's in the turn. Speed brakes are out. Speed brakes are always used for landing in the F-16. Take another look here at how I'm doing. Looking pretty good. 3 or 4 degrees, nose down, 1.3, 1.4 degrees of pull, correction, G's of pull. Alright, letting the airspeed get a little bit low here. Airspeed's getting quite low, but correcting. Alrighty. Looking good. Now we're planning on touching down in the center line of the runway. If I do this right, I want to be a mile from the end of the runway when I roll wings level. I want to be at 300 feet plus field elevation is 650, so about 950 feet MSL. I'm a little bit low according to the pitch, so that's pretty close on the altitude there. I'll go ahead and make this a full stop. I'm just correcting the pitch to get back up to that 3-degree glide slope. I need to get my airspeed under control before I touch down. For me, I use the top of the staple. And we're landing on the runway center line. And then we're going to transition to the cold lane. Alright, good enough. Alright, we're down. Of course, I made my call. I didn't do it here, but turning final, 3 green, full stop. And I got 130 knots, so I need to slow down. I'm going to start transitioning over here to the right, left side, in case my wingman behind me needs that hot lane. Alright, I can tell him I'm turning off at the end. Get some nose wheel steering here. And that's about all I wanted to say about that. I'm going to let it roll out here. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to put it on freeze and see if there's anything else I wanted to talk about. As far as the overhead approach goes, that is a closed pattern, what we did. C-L-O-S-E-D. That's how you spell it, closed pattern, as opposed to a radar pattern or a pattern a GCA controller might give you. That's a big pattern with square turns. Notice we didn't make any square turns in this one. We went from our initial upwind heading. We made one continuous 60-degree bank and left turn, rolled out on a downwind heading. So no square turns here. We just did the same thing, turning from dropping off the perch to rolling out on final, one continuous turn. Now the perch is that point where it's one point in space. It's when you're at 1,500 feet above the ground, you look back over your shoulder, you're 45 degrees off the end of the runway, off from the touchdown point, and you're displaced, trying to put that missile rail, in this case on the left wing, putting that on the edge of the runway. So when you get to that point right there, that is the perch, and that is where you start your turn to final. So think of it as a bird's nest up in a tree. A bird fell off the perch. It means you fell out of the tree, so you're falling off a downwind and making your turn to base and final to land. Alright, I think that's what I wanted to talk about there. I hope this helps somebody, and trip out.